Welcome to On the Ground for Palestine. This is your host Ryan, and it's May 7th. The weather is lovely here in Palestine and Israel, a warm but not overly hot day. Those should arrive in the next week or so. We continue to tweak how we produce the podcast, so we're hoping it's easier on your ears this week. Now, here's your weekly roundup of what is happening on the ground in Palestine and Israel, and news on activism for Palestine. We begin in Germany, where authorities in Berlin banned all pro-Palestinian protests for a couple of days, alleging that some protesters have made anti-Semitic remarks. The short-term ban targeted a protest in support of Palestinians that was scheduled to take place last Friday, but was canceled by the city's police. Organizers of the protests contested the ban, arguing the action of a few protesters should not be used to judge the rest of those who take part in the protests, nor should all future events be judged by the past actions of a handful of protesters. Second, 972 magazine has published the results of an investigation that found that the Israeli army is making millions by seizing Palestinian tractors. The investigation states that, quote, data obtained by Kerem Navot further shows that between 2014 and 2020, the civil administration raised more than 8 million new Israeli shekels, or $2.4 million US, from release fees for the seized equipment, and profited some 2.5 million shekels, or $750,000, from selling equipment that owners were unable or unwilling to reclaim. In other words, the civil administration raked in over 10 million shekels from the confiscation of agricultural and construction equipment over that period. And on Monday, 3 Palestinian miners were injured by Israeli gunfire, and a 4th was detained during clashes in the village of Neilin, west of Ramallah. Sources told the news agency Wafa that clashes broke out between Palestinian youth and Israeli forces after those forces raided the village. The injured were taken to hospital and reported to be in stable condition. 4th, Ubay Aboudi, the executive director of Bisan Center for Research and Development, was detained by Israeli forces while attempting to enter Jordan. He was on his way to attend the World Social Forum in Mexico and was also scheduled to go on a speaking tour in the United States. Bisan Center was one of the 6 organizations that, in October of 2021, were designated as terrorist organizations by the Israeli government. Israel has still yet to provide any proof of these claims. They reportedly supplied the Biden White House with evidence, but neither the Biden White House nor the Israeli government has commented on or shared that evidence with the public. Next, Hamoked, an Israeli rights group that regularly gathers figures from prison authorities, said that as of May, there are 604 detainees held in administrative detention, without charge or trial, by Israel. Nearly all are Palestinians. It is the largest number of Palestinians in administrative detention since 2016. Another 2,441 Palestinians are serving sentences after being convicted in military courts, while another 1,478 detainees are being held for questioning, have been charged and are awaiting trial, or are currently being tried. Sadly, after a legal battle lasting over 20 years, Israel's High Court ruled this week that roughly 1,000 Palestinians can be evicted from an area of the West Bank and the land dedicated for Israeli military use. It will be one of the single largest expulsions since the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories in 1967. About 3,000 hectares of Masafar Yatta, a rural area south of Hebron and home to several Palestinian villages, was designated as a firing zone by the Israeli military in the 1980s. Such land seizures and forcible transfers are illegal under the Geneva Conventions. However, Israel argued that the villagers living in the firing zone were not permanent residents. The court accepted that argument, ignoring documents and expert testimony that demonstrated the area had been inhabited for decades. 7th, Khalil Awadeh was rushed by the Israeli prison services from Ramla prison to an Israeli hospital when his medical condition suddenly became critical. Khalil is 40 years old and comes from Edina, near Hebron. He has been on a hunger strike for over 65 days in protest of his administrative detention order. Finally, a coalition of 46 UK civil society organizations urged the government on Thursday to halt legislation that would target boycott, divestment, and sanctions, or BDS, efforts against Israel. The law, if enacted, would prohibit public organizations and bodies from imposing boycotts or divestment campaigns against foreign countries, including Israel. The law is expected to be announced during the Queen's speech on May 10th. Before we go, we have one correction to last week's news. Last week, we stated that Human Rights Watch had named Sari Bashi as their new program director. We described Sari as a Palestinian activist, author, and lawyer. We should, of course, have referred to her as a Jewish Israeli activist for Palestine. That's our news for the week. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We should now be widely available through all the major podcast directories, including Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts, along with the video version on YouTube. Links for subscribing to the podcast are in the show notes, which are located below the video on YouTube. If you can't find the podcast somewhere, let us know and we'll look into it. We want to be as discoverable as possible. We'll be back again next week. In the meantime, if you have an idea for how to improve the podcast or for a story we should include, please email us at kumi@kuminow.com. If you like this weekly roundup, we suggest you join us at kuminow.com, follow us on social media, and join our weekly Kumi Now newsletter. You can sign up at kuminow.com/register. We thank you for your role in activism for Palestine and Israel, for only together may we rise up.